Thursday's testimony from fired FBI Director James Comey is shaping up to be one of the most dramatic and highly viewed hearings in years. To help you get ready to watch, starting at 10 on Thursday, here is a brief look at each of the 15 men and women on the Senate Intelligence Committee. They're vitally important players in this drama because their questions will do a great deal to determine whether the congressional investigation of Russian meddling in last year's election and the Trump campaign's potential involvement has real legs or will be dismissed as so much partisan posturing. Here they are in order of committee seniority, which will determine their order in asking questions of Comey. Chairman Richard Burr holds the Senate seat once occupied by Sam Ervin, who was the legendary chairman of the Watergate Committee in the 1970s. Burr was a national security advisor to Trump's campaign and never wavered in his support last fall, even though he was in a tight re-election race himself in a toss-up state. But now, in his third year as chairman, he's sending strong signals he's about running a serious and down-the-middle investigation. And he's described himself as, quote, troubled by the timing and reasoning of Comey's firing. An appliance salesman who was a House member for a decade before coming to the Senate in 2005, he's viewed among the least pretentious senators, a reputation bolstered every time he arrives on the Hill driving his old gray Volkswagen Thing convertible. A commitment to being perceived as bipartisan means Mark Warner gets to call himself vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, not the customary phrase, ranking Democrat. And by all appearances, he and Burr have a solid working relationship. A venture capitalist who made millions in the early years of cell phones, Warner was an activist governor from what he liked to call the radical political center, and then very briefly a presidential candidate before coming to the Capitol in 2009. Since then, he's sometimes struggled with the Senate's partisanship and slow, if not gridlocked pace. But he's displayed new energy thanks to the Russia probe, which he calls, quote, probably the most important thing I've done in public life. Of all the members of the committee, Jim Risch has been the most outspoken defender of Trump's behavior with Russia, focusing his anger instead on what he calls the weasels and traitors who have leaked stories about the president sharing classified intel with the Russians. Now in the middle of his second term, he's otherwise among the least visible senators. Dianne Feinstein was committee chairwoman until 3 years ago, the last time the Democrats were in charge. Recently, she's been saying that, while she hasn't seen evidence of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, Congress should be just as intent on investigating White House efforts to impede investigations or cover its tracks. The oldest current senator, she turns 84 this month and is leaning toward running for a fifth full term next year. Marco Rubio's plan last year was to win the presidency or go home. But after he lost the GOP nomination, he changed his mind and won a second Senate term. He was already one of the Capitol's most prominent Russia hardliners, and now he's eager to use this investigation to lay out for the public the extent of Moscow's interest in and aptitude for disrupting the U.S. government. Ron Wyden is one of the committee's most combative members and has called it, quote, an established fact that Trump actively encouraged Russia to, quote, attack our democracy. Having been in office more than 2 decades, he's the top Democrat on the Tax Writing Finance Committee and is blocking the confirmation of the person who would monitor terrorism financing at the Treasury Department until the department provides documents about the financial ties between Russia and Trump associates. Her voting record makes Susan Collins the Senate's most centrist Republican, and since January she's been among the few in the GOP who have criticized Trump more than sporadically. She also knows plenty about investigations, having spent 4 years as chairwoman of the Senate committee that does most congressional oversight, and having started her life on Capitol Hill interning back in 1974 for a House Judiciary Committee member during the impeachment proceedings against Richard Nixon. Martin Heinrich, who looks like a safe bet to win a second term next year, has been focusing his criticism of Trump on the president's disclosure to Russian officials in the Oval Office of highly classified intelligence provided by Israel. Roy Blunt is a former House Majority Leader who's now number 5 on the Senate GOP leadership ladder. Evidence he's one of the best players of the inside game at the Capitol. He's talked passionately about Congress doing a thorough Russia investigation, hoping that puts the matter to rest so that Congress can focus on tackling the Trump legislative agenda. An independent who was governor for 2 terms, retired from politics and came back a decade later to join the Senate, Angus King caucuses with the Democrats and is known for outside-the-box ideas, including his recent proposal that the Intelligence Committee appoint Comey himself as the staff director for this Russia investigation. James Lankford has not let Trump off the hook as easily as many GOP conservatives, pressing the president to release his tax returns and declaring that the Comey dismissal left the American people needing clarity and, quote, deserving an explanation. He's halfway through his first term after rising to a junior leadership job in the House during just 2 terms. Joe Manchin is a Democrat from the most pro-Trump state in the nation last year, and the member of the committee with the toughest re-election prospects for next year. Bending the panel's inquiry as, quote, not a witch hunt, has been his ready soundbite when he was back home over Memorial Day. The youngest current senator, having turned 40 just a month ago, Tom Cotton is laying the groundwork for an eventual presidential run. But until then, he says he's ready to help Trump change the subject. After just 5 months in D.C., following 2 terms as state attorney general, Kamala Harris is already keeping her name in the mix as a potential Democratic national candidate in 2020. And to that end, she's been one of the president's tartest critics. She was, for example, the first senator to call for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to resign. Not only is he the majority whip, number 2 in the GOP chain of command, but John Cornyn was also the first person to get interviewed and then remove himself from consideration as Comey's replacement at the FBI. His leadership job has essentially required him to stick up for Trump, a role he says is made harder by the president's, quote, Twitter habit. When each of these senators gets their chance to question Comey, they can either make or potentially break their own careers in the process.